Here.
Right on.
Thank you. A couple of housekeeping things. Does anybody know the password to the Wi-Fi? Okay, never mind. I've got one thing that I was going to do here with the computer.
It's 2584. Polk, Polkhist, 2584, and an ampersand.
Gosh, you're not going to have anybody jumping in, maybe. Well, anyway, we'll see how that works later. Second, when they started talking about the fire thing, I look back, we really are kind of tight in here, but I found there's this window right here, and Trey Kelly's the tallest man in the room, so I think we'll be okay. So we'll be fine. Oh, okay, great. And when am I supposed to stop talking?
When you finish.
Well, because I mean, really, is there? Do y'all have a typical 8 o'clock, 8:15, 8:30, 9 o'clock? Okay, if y'all are fine, I'm fine, because I kind of rewrote this thing. I used to have a preacher who'd come in sometimes on Sunday morning, and he'd be a little disheveled, and he said, you know, the Holy Spirit just changed my sermon last night, and I had to rewrite the whole thing. Well, I came over this morning and spent some time at the soon-to-be Coke Museum, and then dropped by Parker and Lundy for what I thought was going to be an hour that turned out to be 3, and so I walked out of there at 6, and realizing, you know, when I saw Bill and Trey in ties, I thought, you know, my daddy would have worn a tie to this tonight. And I ran up to Bruce's, but he had already had the door locked and the lights off, so you got casual me. But this is a little more personal than I expected it to be, and I hope that's okay. But anyway, this is where we're going. I'm going to talk a little bit about how I started writing, because I didn't plan to do this. I went off to Auburn to be a dentist, and when I got there, I had to write a term paper my freshman year, and I decided to write a term paper about Bart Starr, and he was coaching the Green Bay Packers then. Y'all remember him? He was quarterback of the Packers, and he was my boyhood hero. I had a poster of Bart Starr over my bed, and he was just such a fine person and a great player, and so I thought I can write a term paper about Bart Starr, and I could even call him up and interview him. And so I called up Green Bay and got his personal secretary, and she said, well, Coach Starr isn't available, probably won't be available, and you probably aren't going to have a chance to talk to him. But his parents live in Montgomery, just 50 miles down the road, and here's their number, and why don't you give them a call? So I called up Bart Starr's parents and got his mother on the phone, and she said, well, why don't you just come on over here and spend some time with us? So I drove over to Montgomery and had the evening with he was, I guess, a staff sergeant and Mrs. Starr, and it just sort of changed everything. I realized, and this is, you know, this is how shallow this whole thing is. I love that access. I mean, I realized I was talking to Bart Starr's parents, and I could do this. I could write for the school paper and have access to all sorts of things. And so I did that, and I wrote for the paper, and I ended up writing, a lot of personal stuff for the paper, but some of the things that you do along the way, and some of the opportunities that it gives you a chance to write about your family. It gives you a chance to write about interesting people. I wrote a column about my grandfather my senior year, and my grandfather was Lee Parker, and probably a few of y'all might have known my granddaddy. He worked at the Liberty Bank for years, and I'll come back to another little story about him in a bit. But my senior year, I wrote a column about my granddad, saying things that, you can say things in a column in a newspaper. This is weird. You can say things in a newspaper at Auburn, 18,000 people who would read it, that you would never say to somebody face to face. And so I wrote things about my granddad, that he was really special to me. And so I wrote this, and it came out on Thursday, and he got the paper. My grandparents or my granddad subscribed to the Plainsman, the school paper, and so I knew it'd be getting to his house, and so I wrote it on Thursday, and he died on Saturday. Oh. And so he never read that column, But so I wrote so we came, we were all here, of course, for the funeral, and several of us, the cousins, several of us slept, stayed in their house, because I don't know if we really needed to, but people say when the house is empty, somebody might get in, so several of us slept in there. And so just listen to his clock tick. He had this small, like a tiny, I forget what you'd call it, but like a grandfather clock is what it sounded like, but small. And just listened to that all night long, and wrote another column the next week about what had happened and about how special I was. And then when I came home sometime later, it might have been even after I graduated, I walked in my dad's office, and he had framed those two columns and put them on the back wall of the office, and it just it helped you understand, helped me understand, as a 21, 22-year-old kid, what a father having his son, and what my dad having me write about his father meant, and how important these family stories are, and we let so many of them get away. I mean, every one of you is thinking of somebody right now that I wish I'd asked him something. I wish I'd asked her this. Wonder how this happened. Why this? And so we have an opportunity to do that now. I was at a deal at the Atlanta History Center last week. They had the Lee brothers in, and the Lee brothers are these. They're on the Food Network. They do a lot of cooking stuff, but they do a lot of writing too. They're sort of like food anthropologists, but they also. But they were there speaking, and something they said really struck me. They said it's the last call for the oral history of the 20th century. We're at a point now where every one of us knew somebody who could tell us about the 19th century in our lifetime, and every one of them is dead. Well, we're at the point now where there aren't many people alive who can talk about the 40s, 50s with really strong memories. And we're losing them all. We're losing we talk about the World War II veterans, and of course there's that and what they experienced, and there are a lot of wonderful programs capturing. But what about Main Street, Cedartown in 1948? There are just the day-to-day stories that are so really easy to capture. The technology, used to. When I started writing books, I used a little micro cassette recorder. And then I'd have to transcribe that, and then I went to a digital recorder, and now you got the digital recorder that does with the USB, and I can plug it into my computer and send it to. There's a website called rev.com and rev.com, and for $1 a minute, and this is $1 a minute of transcription, which would cost me, it would take me a lot more than a minute to transcribe a minute. For $1 a minute, they transcribe all of my interviews. And then now it's gotten so easy that if you have a smartphone, you've got a recorder here. So you've got no excuse. You don't have to go out and buy this. If you've got a smartphone, you've got a recorder right here. And all you have to do is turn it on and plug it in, and, put it in front of somebody and start talking. And when you do that, you've captured your stories. You ask families stories, and because they're going to be gone. They're going to be gone if we don't do that. So here's what, give you just a little bit of background on how I did this, whatever this is. I've been writing books for about 21 years now. Mostly, books that nobody would ever, not nobody, obviously somebody has heard of them, but very small audiences. And I started thinking about it in about 1991, and I had a friend who was our preacher at Northside Methodist Church in Atlanta. He was a great storyteller. I had written for the newspaper in Atlanta, and then I'd been writing corporate newsletters for about 6 or 7 years, and I was writing about calcium carbonate and CPAP machines and your favorite getaway destinations for American Express, and we had a great list of clients, but it was all just business to business type stuff, and I missed writing the real stories. So I started working on this book with Bill, thinking that if I could get a book written and show people what I could do, I could write I might could get people to pay me to write a book. I couldn't say, Mr. Greer, I'd like to write your book, but I've never done one. Would you hire me? Well, of course he wouldn't. So I had to write one just to get it out there. So I put this together, and we started. I decided in early 1994 that this is what we were going to do, and so in March of '94, went to the two owners of the company I was working for, and I said, I'm going to get out of here in 3 months. I'm gone. Said, I didn't tell them all the details, but basically, Lexi and I had been married for, let's see, from '86 to '94, 7 years at that point. Didn't have kids. The doctor said, you're not going to have kids. The doctors never say you're not going to have kids. The doctors say, we can get you pregnant. But, so we're done with it. So Lexi and I said, okay, we're not going to have kids. We don't have to worry about this. Let's just do what we want to do. I said, I want to write books. She said, okay. And so we did that. I quit my job. And 2 weeks later, she said, I'm pregnant. I said, okay. We have burned the boats. There's no going back. So we went forward, and we finished up the book and got it printed, and it was a real fun time. We set a date for our sort of a big launch for the book. Bill, the person I'd written about, was going to come back. He had retired by then. He was coming back to Northside. He was really popular. We knew we'd sell a lot of books, but we also knew we'd really get the word out to the right kind of people who might be able to, to do a book like this. And so we set September 25th is on a Sunday for the big launch, and there at the church, and him to sign. And on Tuesday before Sunday, my grandmother called and said, your dad has had a heart attack. And so we thought, what were we going to do? Well, we had to go forward with it. I mean, this was, we had to bring Bill back. This had been planned for months. And so we grabbed up all of Uncle Fred's roses that he had, filled the Methodist church with for Daddy's funeral, and all the other flowers, and took them back to Atlanta, because the funeral was on Thursday, kept them fresh until Sunday, and just filled the hall with the flowers and Daddy's presents, and launched our book and our company, and started writing books. And so, these are, for the last 21 years, I've really helped people. It's not exactly write an oral history. An oral history looks like this. And this is a book that I did for two women down in Glenn County. And this is an unbelievable resource. And I'll leave this to y'all. I don't know if anybody cares about Glenn County history, but this is memories from the marshes of Glenn in World War II. So what these two women did, they interviewed about 250 people in Glenn County to talk about their memories from the war. And so they had shipyards there in Brunswick. I believe 3 shipyards. They were building 52 ships a year and launching the Liberty ships from Brunswick. So they had all these shipyards running. They were running 24 hours a day. Brunswick has, at that time, it might have had 10,000 people. During the war, it had 75,000 people. So there are wonderful stories about families who hot-bedded shift workers. You sleep for 8 hours and then go to work, and somebody else would sleep for 8 hours and go to work, and somebody. So you had just shifts of people sleeping at your house and feeding them and all. And the stories from the naval base out on St. Simon's, and the Blint base, and all of these people were. So they just went around and recorded all these stories and just wrote them. It's not a narrative. What I typically do is I take those recordings and try to craft a narrative, which is very different from an oral history. This is just strictly what they said, and as a research. And the one thing that I wish we had done, we didn't index. I mean, it was just too massive. But it's spend some time with that if you're interested in World War II history. I think you'll enjoy that. But the difference between what that is and what I do, as I say, is I write a narrative. You know, I listen to people. I go with the recorder, sit down, transcribe it or have it transcribed, and then try to find the pieces that have a beginning and a middle and an end, and connect all of those dots. And so there's so many dots. You know, I'm working on a story now. And I've told you all about this before. You know, I think the last time I was here, I talked to you all about to the ones of y'all who were here last time. The others, but about Hoyt and Sue. You know, the murderers who came through town. And in doing that book, I've talked 15 years ago. I talked to a lot of people here in Cedartown, and that was a lot of fun. And just to talk about a few of the folks. And these are the things that you can learn when you're just talking to folks that let me see, like I talked to George Isbell, and you know, Mr. Isbell was president of the bank for years, but he talked about and I went ostensibly to talk about the bank robbery that happened, you know, but in '58, I believe. But we talked a little bit about the background and then just general stuff. He said, you know, I graduated in June in '36, and I started working at the service station on weekends for Roy Adams. In July, I heard about an opening at the bank, so I talked to Mr. Fred. That'd be Mr. Fred Brewster, of course. Not of course. For some of us, that's of course. He said, I didn't know if they needed anybody or if they could afford anybody, but I could come stand around and see if I might like it. I didn't have anything else to do, so on August 1st, 1936, I went up there and started standing around. Didn't have anything else to do, so I just kept going back. I'd been paid $10 a week at the service station, so Saturday came and I thought I might get $10. But nobody said anything about getting paid, so I said, well, maybe I'm working for the experience. That was common in those days. Or maybe they'll pay twice a month. The 15th came around and nobody said anything about getting paid, so I thought, well, I guess I'm getting a lot of experience. But at the end of the month, they gave me $40, and that established my salary. It was a little less than the service station on an annual basis, but he said he was the fourth man in. George Boston was the first, and then Fred Brewster, and then my grandfather, Lee Parker, he was the fifth person, and then Margaret Weatherly, and then Mr. Isbell. Well, those are just little things that sort of don't mean anything, but that's sort of the glue that holds all of this place together. I talked to, I talked to Harold Murphy. He's the federal judge up in Rome now, but he's my dad's age, and he grew up in Felton. But he says, I knew Lee Parker at the bank, and my father bought insurance from him, and he said he got liability. The things people remember. He said, I was going through some paper that you find if you start digging, and I guess maybe some people are hoarders too, but I was going through papers at my parents, and I found that they had insurance with $5,000 and $10,000 limits, and they had a $30 premium. And he found savings account stuff, but he said, but this is what was interesting to me. At 14 years old, he says Cedartown was where you went to do your grocery shopping when you lived in Felton. He said, I went to high school in Buchanan, but I went to grammar school at Benedict. I went to Benedict because Haralson County Schools didn't have any money. They had planned to have 7 months of school, but they ran out of money after 5 months. So my parents took my brother and me to the county line, and we rode a bus to Benedict, and then the bus would drop us off at the line after school, and we'd walk home, and their parents paid tuition to Polk County to let them do that. Well, you think about the importance of that. He's a federal court judge. And so, these are, again, just the little stories. I called up Odell Owens. Mr. Owens and I we sort of made a connection in high school, and he was in Atlanta for some reason. I live in Decatur, and I said, Mr. Owens, I'd like to talk to you about, I grew up in a time that was, we integrated schools when I was in 6th grade. Well, complete integration in 6th grade. It started when I was in 2nd grade. But come talk to me a little about, and for whatever reason, this is just one little piece that we got to talking about Mark Cornelius, and because Mark Cornelius had had a grocery store down there close to where, and Mr. Owens traded with him. And he said, Cornelius was a very instrumental person for black and white Cedartown community. He had a heart as big as all outdoors. He was crude. He loved to fight. Whether you were black or white, he'd fight you in a minute, and he wouldn't let anybody help you. He said, but he also said several times I'd go in and say, Cornelius, I don't have all your money, because you ran a tab everywhere. He said, don't worry about it. Don't pay anything this month. You can catch up later. He said, you're friends. He was friends as long as he played straight with him. And he said he was telling a joke one day. Cornelius was. And Mr. Owens said, I've always been blunt. And he was telling a joke in the store, and he started to use the N-word. And I said, hold it just a minute. You know very well I don't appreciate that. And he said, Odell, I'm so sorry. Forgive me. I'm sorry. I don't mean it. Sometimes I don't mean anything negative, just to show you. You come to my house tomorrow and have dinner with me and sit down at my table. And Mr. Owens said, no, that's not necessary. But it was just sort of, finding your way. And he came in, I think he said he came in 52. We got talking about S.Q. Rogers, and this is why I found this, because I know y'all were talking with Julia Trewick last night about Mr. Rogers, and this is how I ended up with Odell Owens' stories for tonight. And I thought this was really interesting. He said they had and Olin Bates tells sort of the same story here. But he said S.Q. Rogers had a football team going really good when I came here in 1952. He said the whites came out of enjoyment for our games with a different kind of enjoyment than when they watched yours, meaning the white high school games. He said they went to your games out of obligation, but they came to ours to enjoy them. But he said even that, so they were going to Gray Field to watch the games, and he said we were the home team, but the blacks sat on the visitor side of the field, and the stands over on the other side were packed with white people, but we had to stay on the visitor side. And it just helps, without any judgment. It's very easy to judge that, but he was just telling it. And so these are the stories that I know that, and I'm going to jump ahead a little bit, but with the statues that Julia is putting together for down in the South End for the Walk of Fame, I think, and so for people who are in the Georgia Sports Hall of Fame, and I guess we have 6 of them here from Cedartown, and there's a group that I think y'all are and several others are working with that I think this group would really it would be wonderful if the Historical Society or members of the Historical Society got involved, but are putting together a proposal for S.Q. Rogers to be in the State Sports Hall of Fame. 4 state championships. Well, think about that. They won 4 state championships, and I forget what he had, a winning record of something like 70%. I mean, it was unbelievable what they were doing. So he belongs there, and so Julia was over here last night. That what they need for to put together the application. They're getting letters of recommendations, and they're getting records, and then they were interviewing some former players to tell stories and that kind of thing, and all of this will help put together that, and so hopefully this, I'm not sure when the induction, but hopefully soon Mr. Rogers will be a member of or Coach Rogers. I called him Mr. Rogers because when I went to he was our math teacher up at the middle school when I was up there. He wasn't my coach, but anyway, Coach Rogers was very special. Those of y'all who knew him. I was, he used to say something that I'm sure was a double entendre that I'm not going to say out loud because I'm really a little naive and somebody's going to get it and say, you shouldn't be saying that in a group. But he used to say, just funny things to you. And I see Bill here laughing. He just really endeared himself to me in a special way. And I'm sorry I didn't play for him, but anyway, these are the stories that you need to be collecting, that you can do just talking to your parents, telling your children, your grandchildren. These are the stories that I remember Uncle Fred, we were talking about Lexi and I were looking at a little piece of property somewhere out behind Hightower, and I was asking Uncle Fred just for his advice on it. He said, well, you know, it holds the world together. And that's really all these stories, but they're so important to our friend. I mean, there's so many things I wish I'd asked my dad, you know, that I wish I knew from him, and they're gone. They're just gone. So here's what a few of the things, and I just want to kind of hit quickly on a few things I've had an opportunity to do, because I told you about it gave me, writing has given me access to really interesting people. Not particularly famous people, but every book that I've done, I've done, I'm not sure, between 25 and 30 books, I guess. And every one of them has changed me in a certain way. I got to work with Joe Rogers Sr. Nearly 20 years ago now. Mr. Rogers founded Waffle House. And he grew up in Jackson, Tennessee, and his dad worked for the railroad until he got fired by the railroad during the Depression. I shouldn't say fired, laid off by the railroad during the Depression. And so his dad worked on the back of or ran the cleaning, the laundry truck for $1 a day during the Depression. And so Mr. Rogers went off to war. Actually, he trained bomber pilots here. Didn't go off to war. He trained bomber pilots in Texas. But came back and went to work for Tidal House. Does anybody remember Tidal House? Does that ring a bell at all? Tidal House was started in Memphis by Fred Smith. Fred Smith owned Dixie Greyhound, and he thought, well, I want a place when people come in on the bus. I want a place for them to eat. So he bought this little chain called Tidal House from a guy in Texas. He started putting these little Tidal houses right near the bus down lease, and put this restaurant on it. And after 90 days, if he wasn't selling as much food as he wanted to, he would pick it up and put it on the back of a flatbed truck and take it someplace else. And that's how it got the name Tidal House, because it looked like it's going to toddle off the back of that flatbed truck. So Joe Rogers worked for him for 10 years and realized I'd like, Tidal House would not sell stock to the employees, and so he said, I want to own something. And this is what I found with the Greatest Generation. If y'all have read the book, but you know who they are. Mr. Rogers was a part of the Greatest Generation. It's these guys who either come back from the war, right after the war, they want to build something. They didn't necessarily want to get rich, although some of them did. They just wanted to build something and do something. So he came back, and after 10 years, when he couldn't build his own thing with the Tidal House, he started Waffle House. He built the first one in Avondale, and now they have, I don't know, about 1,500 of them. So he built that. We wrote that book, and after that, I got a call I met a guy from Chick-fil-A, and he had seen the Waffle House book, and he said, we've been thinking about doing something like this for Kathy. Would you help us out with that? And I said, of course. What an incredible opportunity. Now, working with Truett was we ended up doing 4 books together, and he's just salt of the earth. He never went to college. Joe Rogers never went to college. These guys, Truett in 1946 opened the Dwarf Grill. I'm sure a lot of y'all have eaten at the Dwarf Grill there in Hateville. And he and his brother opened it. And it was a 24-hour restaurant, and they would work alternating shifts, 12 hours on, 12 hours off. And Truett rented a house right next door, or rented a room right next door. He was single. So that if his brother was working late at night, Truett could hear the cars, and it got busy all of a sudden. Truett could hear the cars crunching in the gravel, and he would get up out of bed and come over and help his brother. So he did that for 21 years before he opened the first Chick-fil-A restaurant. Think about that. He never envisioned a chain of restaurants. He just wanted his little mom and pop flipping hamburgers, cooking breakfast, taking care of the people, local people there in Hateville, and yet doing it, he was very successful just with that one restaurant. He actually opened a second restaurant in Forest Park. He thought he was going to do a chain of restaurants up and down Highway 41, but after he opened his second one, he realized, he said, I just doubled my trouble here. It's just, I wish I'd never opened the second one. So when the second one burned down, he really thought that was a sign from God, said, you really just needed one restaurant. So he never opened another restaurant. In fact, he leased that space I take that back. He rebuilt it and hated it so much, he leased it. Ted Davis, was that his name? Davis Brothers Cafeterias. Ted Davis came through and said, I'll take it off your hands. And he took that restaurant and turned it into the first Kentucky Fried Chicken restaurant in Atlanta. So that was the first time that they came in, and they were there in Forest Park in Truett's old restaurant site. That lease ran out about 15 years ago. Truett took it back and built a Chick-fil-A in its place, or maybe actually another dwarf house. So, but Truett, the last book we worked on together, he wanted to write a book really to his grandchildren, and it's called Wealth, Is It Worth It? And he was really concerned about his grandchildren inheriting all this wealth and never having worked for it, really. I mean, they all work in the restaurants, but they didn't work the way he did. And they didn't work even the way his children did, helping him build the business and, scraping gum from under the counters and the tables and doing all the really hard work of running a restaurant. And so he wrote a book about it. We interviewed people who had won the lottery. And, how many lottery winners are wealthy 10 years later? Almost none of them. They go through the money, they lose it. He knew a guy who had found some jewelry on the side of the road as a kid down in Florida. A teenager in Florida, had turned it into the police. The police never found the owner, so they gave it back to the kid. And all of a sudden, he had all these friends. And it wasn't long before he was into drugs and alcohol, and so Truett was really concerned. He wrote, he did what, again, it's a little more focused and a bigger project than what most of us would sit down and do, and yet in a book form, it's just what we would want to do for our children and grandchildren, give them good advice, and that's what you can do just sitting down with a recorder, just sitting down, not just you and a recorder, but you really have to talk to somebody. You need to have a child in front of you that you can have some back and forth conversation rather than simply dictating into a book. So after I'd done the book with Truett, I thought, well, gosh, we've done Chick-fil-A, we've done Waffle House. It'd be really cool to do the other iconic restaurant in Atlanta, which is the Varsity. And I know I've talked to y'all really years ago, about the Varsity book, but it was a really, this is closer to an oral history, because at that time nobody was alive, and still is nobody alive, who had worked at the Varsity before 1954. Or at least the Varsity in Atlanta. There was one guy who had been a car hop from the 40s at the Athens restaurant, and so we spent a long time with him. But pretty much everybody had died young. Mr. Gordy, who had founded the Varsity, everybody else who really knew the stories firsthand had died. Even Mrs. Gordy was alive, but she never went down there. It was not a place for ladies. They didn't mean for it not to be a place for ladies, but there was no women's restroom inside. So, so that sort of sends you, So when Mr. Gordy died and his daughter Nancy took over, the first, she went for about a year, walking outside and around the restaurant to the back to get to the ladies' bathroom. And she said, "I've had it with this," and she had to build a ladies' restroom inside. But since there was nobody who really knew that story, we ended up interviewing customers And we sent it, and so that really sort of became an oral history of the varsity. And we had stories like this woman, Alice Goncher Diskin, was a teenager when she ate her first varsity hot dog. Now, she had grown up in Atlanta, but she had never eaten a hot dog before, even though she had virtually grown up in the varsity in the 1930s. Her father owned the tailor shop right next door to the varsity. As a little girl, my favorite thing was a slice of pound cake that they toasted on the flat grill and served with a scoop of ice cream and chocolate sauce on top. I don't know if I see some nodding heads. Some of y'all have had that toasted that toasted pound cake. She also ate many varsity sandwiches, but never a hot dog until that fateful night when she hovered at the brink of adulthood. She had ridden to the varsity with one of her friends, and she had seen many of them eat hot dogs. Nothing ever happened to them, but she became ill. It was such an emotional thing, she says. I believe God was punishing me for eating that hot dog. I was sick all night, emotionally and mentally and physically, because I knew I had done something wrong. It was my first big sin. You see, we were Jewish, and we were not allowed to eat non-kosher food. That varsity hot dog was the first non-kosher kosher food I ever ate, and it was delicious. And then we've got another. So access. So I got to interview Jeff Foxworthy to talk about the varsity, and he says the first time I ever played at the Fox, and for a kid who grew up in Atlanta, that was a big, huge deal. My wife and kids and I came from Los Angeles, and they put us up in a suite at the Ritz-Carlton Buckhead. The whole family came in, my mom and dad, my brothers and sisters. There must have been 15 or 20 of us in the suite. We were trying to decide what to do for dinner because we wanted to keep on visiting. I hadn't had a varsity chili dog in 2 years, and you know your system will kick back on you if you don't get that patented varsity grease to keep things moving, especially when you eat as many as I did. So my brother went down to the varsity and got one of those big moving boxes of chili dogs and onion rings and brought them to the Ritz-Carlton, and you could smell them 3 floors away. I got on the elevator the next morning, and I could still smell those chili dogs. I'm sure the Ritz-Carlton folks appreciated that. So when he says, it's still fun for me to go to the varsity, and it's okay not to be anonymous when I'm there. For whatever level of celebrity I have, nobody comes up to me and says, "Excuse me, Mr. Foxworthy." Instead, they say, "Hey, Jeff, let me tell you what my brother did last week." Or I'll be in line and somebody will say, "Hey, Jeff, when you get your tray, come over here and let me tell you something." That's where my material comes from. There's not a lot of research going on with me. People just tell me things. So it's just fun to write stories like this, to write books like this. And then you get into, I graduated from Auburn, and I've done a couple of books with the chaplain for the Auburn football team. And we did this book a couple of years ago called The Broken Road. And it was ostensibly about the national championship season, but it was really about talking about the players and the struggles that they had. It's amazingly hard to be a college football player. I mean, Bill can tell you that. He's probably the only one in the room. I can't imagine. But again, just talking about access, I had a chance. So this was really at the beginning of the season before Cam Newton was Cam Newton, and I got a chance to sit down and spend some time with him. He said, "I had a long journey to get to where I am right now," Cam said. "Spiritually, it's been a long process, but I can tell you to this day that do y'all know Cam's story? You know, he got run out of Florida because he stole a laptop and had to go to a junior college out in Texas and sort of rehab. I mean, it was really, really bad. But he says, but I can say to this day that junior college was the best thing that ever happened to me. I found myself. I was young and naive in Florida. I pray every morning thanking God for putting me in the situation that I'm in." And then he added, "He's using me to extend His word, and I'm a prime example of how God can turn something that was bad into something very great." Cam was not proclaiming his personal greatness. He was saying that he was declared great through Christ. That is the gospel. We are declared great through our faith in Christ, and we can be transformed. That transformation, Jesus said, will lead us to become like little children. Nobody on the team was more childlike than Cam, and I think he still is, just from the way you see him. In fact, people, he catches a lot of flack for being such a kid, but he's just a kid. He's just a little, just hadn't, which I find lovely. When we were playing with the children, they went on They went on a mission trip to the Dominican Republic. The chaplain, Chet Williams, took 11 of them down to the Dominican Republic on a mission trip. When we were playing with the children in the Dominican Republic, Cam said, I was trying to put a smile on the face of every kid out there, whether it was throwing a baseball, kicking a soccer ball, or shooting hoops. I just wanted to make them smile. We had candy to share, and I had mine for about 2 minutes. I was giving it out so fast, they brought tears to my eyes to see their little smiles. And then when he came back to school, and this is before school started, this is before, when they just started practicing they practiced, they got Mondays off, and that was pretty much it. They either practiced or were in meetings 6 days a week. And even during the season, they play on Saturday, they do films on Sunday, they get Monday off, and then they practice Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Monday, his only day off, Cam would go down to Wrights Mill Road Elementary School, and he was mentoring 5th grade boys. And so these stories, when you capture that, especially in the time that we were able to capture it, it just resonates. And again, it's the truth in the stories. When you share your stories in truth, people will believe it and they'll know. And you think that, it's the big stories. You think, well, I'm not Cam Newton, I'm not Truett Cathy, I'm not Joe Rogers. Well, or I don't have anything exciting to tell. Sometimes it's just, I'll walk through when my grandmother, Frances Buskirk, was alive. I was looking for a way to get into some of her stories. Well, she had a house full of antiques. And so I just took a recorder in there one day and said, and we went from room to room, and I said, tell me about this. Tell me about this rocker. Tell me about this. And she would tell me about, well, this, and things that are in my house now. Well, we bought this table for $1 from the woman up the street, or things that she talked about. We have a platform rocker that's in my living room now that was in her grandmother's house, that she says it had, when she was a little girl, it had mohair on the seat, and she said when I sit down on it, it scratched the backs of my legs. Well, that's just one little detail. When you think about your grandmother being 5 years old, sitting on her grandmother's chair that's now in my living room, that's special. I mean, it's not anything that's going to, that any of you really care about, but I care about it. And you have things like that in your house. You have memorabilia that when you're gone, your children they're going to say, what is this? I wonder why they saved that. And so if you just go through and just talk about those things. Have your child, your grown child, your whatever, come in, walk around your house, pull the things out of the drawer. I have boxes of stuff up in my attic, and frankly, as I'm telling you this, I need to be doing a lot of the same things because I have things upstairs in my attic, or things that we brought from my mother's house that meant a lot to me because I saw them every day, but they aren't going to mean the same things to my children. And sometimes even if I tell my children all these stories, a lot of them won't mean anything to them, but some of them will. Some of them will be important. And so just talk to them. And one last thing, and I can't remember if I've told y'all this before, because it was way back in 2000 when I had this last conversation. And I went down in 2000 to visit with my great aunt Margaret. She was my grandmother's sister, and so my grandmother's younger sister, and so she graduated from Cedartown High School in 1928. So she could tell me about stories She said that was in the days when teachers would take the job anywhere they could and didn't make anything. I made $65 and $75 a month while I was teaching school down here, somewhere else, and they offered me a job in Cedartown for $90 a month. So I immediately went back home because that was quite a raise from 70. This would have been in the 30s. And so she was living now on Highland Avenue with my grandparents, and who would have been her sister and brother-in-law, as well as my great-grandparents, because my great-grandfather went broke about that time because he had a grist mill up here that I believe is in the back of Billy's office now at 109 Main Street, which is why I was peeking in your office a few weeks ago just to see, wait a minute, it's either, Aunt Margaret told me it was right there at the corner, right here at the back alley. So I'm not sure if it was on that corner or where the taxi, where the cab office used to be. I know it wasn't on the other corner because their house is on the other corner where the Gammons or whoever it is parking lot is now. And of course that backed up to the First Baptist Church, which was right over here. I wouldn't have known any of that stuff. Some of y'all could have told me that stuff, but I didn't. My Aunt Margaret's telling me all of this stuff, and then she says it, and Aunt Weezy has retold me this story recently, and Aunt Beth has too, but I hadn't heard this from my father, and you've probably heard this from Aunt Weezy too, but she said, I guess you heard about him cutting the hotel in two. And I said, what? And she said, well, he thought it'd be a real good idea, right across the street. Right across the street. If you look at those two buildings, they're almost identical, and there was a middle section. And my great-grandfather thought it would be a real good idea to cut out, it was a hotel, so he cut out the middle section and somehow put it up on stilts or rollers and moved it over so that it faced, Prior Street? So he had 3 separate houses that he could rent out. So he went broke at some point, and I'm not sure if it was because of, all of that business or, but it was also in the middle of the Depression. So, but now, you ride back, and I have to tell my children. My children know that story, of course, now too, where we can stand on the corner here, look across the street, and say, "This is what your great-great-grandfather did." But that's what people did, what they had to do through the Depression. Now, I don't know how many of y'all knew my dad, and I know very few of you knew my dad when he was little. Aunt Weezy might be the only one.
We went in first grade together.
Right. So she told me, so I was asking about it, I said, well, did the churches, during the Depression, did the churches get involved taking care of people during the Depression? Who took care of people in Cedartown? She said, well, they didn't get taken care of very much, I don't think. So they had the Red Cross. I know they must have had that, and I think they might have had some special welfare programs, but I'm sure they had, but the main thing they had was the Red Cross. And she said, did you know Sophie Hallam, does that, Hallam, who must have worked at the Red Cross? Is that, okay. And I said, no. She said she handled the Red Cross for many years. That's the only agency I can think of. There was a welfare of some kind, but I can't remember who. But I do remember your daddy going by the bank one time and asking Lee for some money, and he didn't give him any. And it was something that he wanted to get. I forget what he wanted to buy, but Jimmy says, well, I guess I'll have to go down to the Red Cross. So from time to time, he was a child that had a slow comeback. So, Daddy would never have told me that story. And to hear this from my great aunt 6 years after Daddy died, that's a treasure. And these are the kinds of things, these are the little pieces that you can pick up. It won't mean anything to you, but they mean the world to me. And the things that you find will mean the world to you. And so take your phone, figure out how to make a recording on it, and get to work. And then, not work, it's fun. It's really fun. And then if you want to make get it transcribed, you can do it yourself. You can hire somebody. You can go to rev.com. But these are the things that, even as a society, you need to be, I'm sorry, I shouldn't say what you need to be doing. You could be doing this collectively. Last night, when Julia was talking about doing this thing with Coach Rogers, she was coming, and she had called me. Interestingly, Julia's studio is about a mile from our house. We're in Decatur, and she's just in Avenue, literally less than a mile from our house. So it's been fun. Lexi and I have gone over several times and seen the statues as she's been working on them, and that's been pretty special. But I told her about recording, because she was going to have 6 or 7 of Coach Rogers' players together and wanted to record them. And I said, well, here's, just go on your phone and find, how it works. And yesterday afternoon, she was in a bit of a panic, apparently, because she didn't know how, she couldn't make it work. And so she called, maybe one of y'all, somehow somebody called the high school, and the high school got 2 students with video recording equipment, professional video recording equipment, and got in there and recorded these players. She called me when I was driving over here this morning, because I was hoping she'd be here tonight, and she was hoping I'd be there last night. But she was just thrilled about what happened last night. She said it was just a magical moment with these players coming together and talking about their stories and being able to get them on video and having, it's a permanent record of an important member of our community. And I'm just thinking about how, years ago, Happy Lee did something similar, although he'd get 36 hours, I don't know how many, he sat in front of a camera and just talked. But it's just an important, it's not that hard to do. I mean, look at, you're recording me right now, right? Mm-hmm. That's how easy it is now. And Aunt Weezy, you need to sit down with Woody and Lou and just let them ask you questions. Bill's dad's gone, my dad's gone. Most of your dads are gone, but now we're the parent. We are the old people now. Yeah. We are the parents and the grandparents. Amen. So, it's our story. It's our story to tell or not. And we have a connection. I did a book several years ago where a woman who was a great-grandmother, she's a great-grandmother now, and she had known her great-grandmother. And she could tell the stories of all these generations and pulled it together in a book. Well, you are the connection to your grandparents. Even as little as you know that your grandparents told you, that's all your children have. And if you don't save that for them, it's gone. They don't. And how important were your grandparents to you? Really important. And so if you don't capture their story, they're gone. If you die without telling your story, your children or your grandchildren might get around to pulling out a recorder and talking about you one day. But we have to honor your father and mother, honor your grandfather and grandmother. Remember these stories and talk about Cedartown in the 40s and 50s or even the 30s and what this place has meant to us, the little things that matter. So, thank you for letting me preach to you. Okay.
When Jimmy and Beth were growing up, they lived on Highland Avenue, and it was during the Depression, and Ma Parker, the mother, gave each of them a nickel to walk down to Main Street to buy some candy. And so when they came back home, Jimmy was eating his candy and Beth didn't have any candy. And Ma said, well, why doesn't Beth have her candy? Is she already eaten it? And Jimmy said, no, we lost her nickel on the way to town.
One of the best programs we ever had was Wheezy, and I forgot these other ladies. It was talking about the houses on College Street. It was fantastic. Okay, they're all gone except Wheezy. That was not recorded.
Oh.
So that's the reason I bought a camera after that, and I've struggled for years and years to try to learn how and do this thing. So I'm trying to get a young person to come in and take over, because I'm on the down end of this thing. But anyway, those stories go to the grave. Absolutely. You talk about, I'll shut up just a minute. This building over here, General Robert Lee Bullard's sister was married to a boy in Cedartown. Now, Pershing put him in charge of the First Army in World War I when it was formed. And he went to Auburn before it was called Auburn. Rode a mule down there. But anyway, the Hallam's knew this family some way, but and they called him Uncle Lee. And the Hallam, the lady, told me, she said, "Mother dressed me in my Sunday best." And we went down to the hotel to meet Uncle Lee. So Robert Lee Bullard was over here at sometime.
Thank you.
Dick, thank you so much.
Thank you for letting me come.
We appreciate that. A lot of names came up in that I knew about in my childhood. Some of them I don't really know that I knew, but I remember my daddy talking about bankers and this and that and the other, and I picked up on a lot of those names, so it was very interesting. And each of us, you know, nobody can tell your story but you. Your version of it anyway. Somebody else might have another version, so you might better get yours on record. I thank you so much for coming, Dick. We do appreciate it. We look forward to seeing all of you next month. We have lovely refreshments in the back that were done by Kathy Kitchens and Ken Bedford, and we thank them very much. And I'm going to ask Glenn Frazier if